The stagecoach nearly disappeared into the wall of white before Zachary Raines even realized it had arrived. And by the time he threw open the door of his ranch house, his heart was already pounding with the certain knowledge that whoever was inside that coach wouldn't survive another hour in this blizzard. The wind howled across the Montana plains like a living thing, angry and relentless, and the temperature had dropped so fast that afternoon that his cattle were already huddled against the barn, their breath creating clouds of fog that disappeared instantly into the storm. Zachary ran through snow that reached his knees, his boots sinking with each desperate step. The driver was slumped in his seat, ice already forming on his beard, and when Zachary yanked open the coach door, he found her inside, a young woman wrapped in layers of wool and cotton that were doing nothing to protect her from the killing cold. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her dark eyes barely focused when she looked at him. "I am here for Zachary Raines," she managed to say through chattering teeth, her accent placing her from somewhere back east, maybe Boston or Philadelphia. Her hands were shaking so violently that she could barely hold onto her small traveling bag. "That would be me," Zachary said, reaching in to lift her from the coach. She weighed almost nothing, or maybe the adrenaline pumping through his veins made her feel that way. "We need to get you inside right now." He carried her toward the house, shouting back at the driver to get himself inside too and to bring the horses to the barn. The wind tried to steal his words, but the old man nodded and began struggling with the reins. Zachary kicked open his front door and brought the woman directly to the fireplace, where he had been feeding logs all day to fight back the cold. The fire roared and crackled, sending dancing shadows across the walls of his simple home. He set her down on the thick rug in front of the hearth and immediately began removing her wet outer layers. Her coat was soaked through, as was the shawl beneath it, and the dress under that was damp enough to be dangerous. She tried to protest, her frozen hands pushing weakly at his. "I cannot," she whispered, her face flushing despite the cold. "It is not proper." "You will die if we worry about proper right now," Zachary said firmly but not unkindly. "I have blankets. I will turn away while you remove the wet dress, but it has to come off." He could see the war in her eyes between modesty and survival, but survival won out. He turned his back and heard the rustle of fabric, then her small voice saying, "I am covered." When he turned around, she had wrapped herself in the thick wool blanket he kept on his armchair, and her wet dress lay in a heap on the floor. Her long, dark hair hung in damp waves around her shoulders, and now that some of the layers were gone, he could see that she was probably around 22 or 23, with delicate features and eyes that held both fear and determination. "My name is Margaret Hayes," she said, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "I answered your advertisement for a wife. I wrote you 3 months ago, and you responded with train fare and instructions to come to Bannack, Montana Territory." Zachary felt his stomach drop. "I never placed an advertisement for a wife." The color that had started to return to her face drained away again. "What do you mean? I have your letters. I have the money you sent for travel." He ran a hand through his dark hair, trying to make sense of this. "Miss Hayes, I swear to you on everything I hold dear that I never sent any such letters or money. I have been running this ranch alone for 2 years since my brother died, and I have never once thought to send for a mail-order bride." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Then who? Why would someone do this?" Before Zachary could answer, the door burst open again and the stagecoach driver stumbled in, covered in snow. "Horses are in the barn," he said, his voice hoarse. "Storm is getting worse. We are not going anywhere for at least 2 or 3 days, maybe more." Zachary nodded and helped the old man to a chair near the fire, then went to hang the wet coats on hooks by the door where they might have a chance of drying. His mind was racing. Someone had impersonated him, had sent for this woman, had paid her way across the country to a man who had not asked for her. It made no sense unless someone was playing a cruel joke, but who would do such a thing? "What is your name, friend?" Zachary asked the driver. "Tom Sullivan," the man replied, holding his gnarled hands toward the fire. "Been driving that route for near on 20 years, and I have never seen a storm come up that fast. One minute the sky was gray but manageable, the next we could not see 3 feet ahead. If we had been another mile out, we would have missed your ranch entirely, and we would all be frozen corpses by morning." Margaret shuddered at his words, and Zachary felt a surge of protectiveness that surprised him. Whatever had brought her here, whoever had lied to her, she was in his home now and under his care. The questions could wait until they were all warm and safe. "I will make coffee," Zachary said. "And I have stew from last night. It is not fancy, but it is hot and filling." He moved to the small kitchen area of his home, which was really just one large room divided by furniture and purpose. His bed was in the far corner behind a curtain he had hung for a sense of privacy, though he lived alone so it barely mattered. The fireplace dominated one wall, with his father's old armchair and the rug positioned to take advantage of the heat. A rough-hewn table with 4 chairs sat in what passed for a dining area, and his kitchen consisted of a cast-iron stove, some shelves with supplies, and a counter where he prepared meals. It was not much, but it was honest and it was his. The ranch sprawled across 200 acres of Montana grassland, and his cattle had been thriving before this blizzard hit. He made a decent living, enough to put money away each month and plan for a future that he had always assumed would remain solitary. As he reheated the stew and put coffee on to boil, he found himself stealing glances at Margaret. Even wrapped in a blanket with her hair in wet tangles, she had a beauty that caught him off guard. There was something in the set of her jaw that spoke of strength, and her eyes, despite their current fear, held intelligence and spirit. "How long have you been traveling?" he asked, needing to break the heavy silence. 3 weeks, Margaret replied. "I took the train from Philadelphia to as far west as the rails would carry me, then the stage coach for the remainder. I spent one night in Virginia City before the final push to Bannack." "Philadelphia," Zachary repeated. "That is a long way from Montana territory." "I had nothing keeping me there," Margaret said quietly. "My father died 2 years ago, and I have been living with my aunt and uncle since then. They made it clear that I was a burden they could no longer afford. When I saw the advertisement for a wife, it seemed like providence. A chance for a new life, a fresh start." Zachary felt anger rise in his chest, not at her but at the circumstances that had driven her across the country. "Your family sent you away. They have 5 children of their own and not enough money to feed them properly. I was taking food from their mouths." She said it matter-of-factly, but he could hear the pain underneath. "The advertisement promised a home, a partnership, a chance to build something meaningful. It promised respect and care. I thought I was coming to a man who wanted a true partner, not just a housekeeper or a means to an end." "Those are fine things to want," Zachary said, pouring coffee into 3 tin cups. He brought them to the fire, handing one to Margaret and one to Tom. "And whoever wrote those letters to you was not wrong about what a good marriage should be. They were just wrong to use my name to do it." Tom sipped his coffee and looked between them. "Seems to me you have got yourself into quite a predicament. The lady cannot exactly go back where she came from, at least not right away. Even when this storm clears, the passes will be snowed in for weeks, and winter in Montana has only just begun. It will be March or April before travel is truly safe again. The implications of his words hung in the air. Margaret would be stranded here in this house with Zachary for months. The impropriety of it would scandalize any decent community, and Bannack, for all its rough edges, still had standards about such things. "I will not impose on you," Margaret said quickly. "Surely there is somewhere in town, a boarding house or a family who might take me in until spring. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to pay for room and board." Zachary shook his head. "Bannack is 6 miles from here, and in winter that might as well be 60. Besides, the boarding house burned down last summer and has not been rebuilt. There are families who might take you in, but getting you to them in this weather is impossible." "Then what am I to do?" Margaret asked, and now the tears did fall, tracking down her cheeks despite her obvious efforts to maintain composure. "I have ruined your reputation by being here unchaperoned. I have imposed on your hospitality under false pretenses. I have nowhere to go and no means to leave." Zachary set down his coffee cup and knelt beside her chair, looking directly into her eyes. "Listen to me, Miss Hayes. None of this is your fault. You were deceived, same as me. And yes, the situation is complicated, but we are both still breathing, which is more than we would be if Tom had not found this ranch in the storm. Tomorrow we will figure out the details. Tonight, we focus on staying warm and staying alive." She searched his face, and he wondered what she saw there. He was 28 years old, weathered by years of ranch work, with dark hair that was usually too long and eyes that his mother had once called storm gray. He had his father's strong jaw and his mother's straight nose, and he knew he was not unpleasant to look at, but he also knew that his life was hard and often lonely, full of back-breaking work and long silences. "You are very kind," Margaret said softly. "Kinder than you need to be to a stranger who appeared on your doorstep with crazy claims." "You are not crazy," Zachary said. "Someone went to a lot of trouble to bring you here. I intend to find out who and why." He stood and returned to the kitchen, ladling stew into 3 bowls. The food was simple, just beef and potatoes and carrots cooked until tender. But it smelled good, and he heard Margaret's stomach growl as he brought the bowls to the fire. They ate in silence, and he noticed that despite her refined manners, Margaret ate with the hunger of someone who had been rationing meals for too long. Tom finished first and leaned back in his chair with a satisfied sigh. That hit the spot. "If it is all the same to you, Raines, I think I will bed down here by the fire. My old bones do not take kindly to cold anymore." "Of course," Zachary said. "I will get you some blankets." He looked at Margaret. "You will take my bed. I will make a pallet on the floor." "I cannot take your bed," Margaret protested. "You can and you will," Zachary said firmly. "You have been through an ordeal and you need proper rest. I have slept on the ground more times than I can count. One more night will not kill me." He could see she wanted to argue further, but exhaustion was winning out over propriety. He gathered blankets and made Tom comfortable near the fire, then showed Margaret to the curtained area where his bed stood. It was a simple rope bed with a corn husk mattress, but he kept clean sheets and had plenty of quilts to pile on for warmth. "There is a chamber pot under the bed if you need it," he said, trying not to feel awkward about such practicalities. "And I will be just on the other side of the curtain if you need anything." "Thank you," Margaret said, "for everything. I know this is not what you wanted or expected, but I am grateful for your kindness. Get some rest, Miss Hayes. Things will look clearer in the morning." He left her there and made himself a pallet near the fire, though not so close that Tom would be disturbed. As he lay down and pulled blankets over himself, he listened to the wind howling outside and thought about the strange turn his life had taken in the space of a few hours. Someone had used his name to bring Margaret here. That much was clear. But who would do such a thing, and to what end? He ran through the people he knew in Bannack and the surrounding ranches. He had no enemies that he knew of, no one who would wish him ill. His brother Thomas had died in a riding accident 2 years ago, and since then, Zachary had kept mostly to himself, working the ranch and making trips to town only when necessary for supplies or business. Could it have been meant as a kindness? Perhaps someone thought he needed a wife and took it upon themselves to find him one. But that made no sense either. No one in town knew him well enough to take such liberties, and those who did know him understood that he valued his solitude. The mystery gnawed at him, but exhaustion eventually pulled him under. He woke several times during the night to feed the fire, and each time he glanced toward the curtain that hid his bed, wondering if Margaret was sleeping or if she too was lying awake, frightened and uncertain about her future. When morning came, it was barely distinguishable from night. The windows showed nothing but white, and the wind still screamed around the corners of the house. Zachary rose and added logs to the fire, then quietly started making breakfast. He had eggs from his chickens, bacon from the smokehouse, and biscuits he could bake in his Dutch oven set in the coals. Tom woke to the smell of cooking food and sat up with a groan. "My back is reminding me I am not as young as I used to be." "Coffee will be ready in a minute," Zachary said. The curtain rustled and Margaret emerged, still wrapped in the blanket but with her hair braided neatly over one shoulder. She looked better than she had the night before, with color in her cheeks and steadiness in her movements. "Good morning," she said quietly. "May I help with anything?" "You can set the table if you like," Zachary said, gesturing to the plates and utensils on the shelf. She moved around the small space with surprising ease, as if she had done such tasks 1,000 times before. When breakfast was ready, they sat together at the table, and Zachary found himself noticing small things about her. The way she closed her eyes briefly before eating, as if saying a silent grace. The neat, efficient way she cut her food. The fact that she sat with her back straight despite the informality of her clothing situation. "The storm shows no sign of letting up," Tom observed, looking toward the white-covered windows. "I have seen blizzards last 3 or 4 days in these parts. We may be here a while." "I need to check on the cattle and horses," Zachary said. "They should be fine in the barn, but I want to make sure the structure is holding against the wind." "I will come with you," Tom offered. Zachary nodded. "We will need to rope ourselves together and to the porch. Visibility is 0 out there, and it would be easy to get turned around and lost even in the short distance to the barn." Margaret's eyes widened. "Is it truly that dangerous?" "In a blizzard like this, you can freeze to death 20 feet from your own front door and never know how close you were to safety," Zachary said. "The cold is one thing, but the disorientation is what kills people. The wind and snow make it impossible to see or hear, and you lose all sense of direction." He gathered rope from a storage chest and fashioned it into a lifeline, tying one end to a support post on the porch and the other around his waist. Tom tied himself to the middle of the line. They wrapped themselves in every piece of warm clothing they could find and prepared to venture out. "Keep the fire going," Zachary instructed Margaret. "And do not, under any circumstances, come outside. If we are not back in an hour, we have run into trouble, but there is nothing you can do about it. Stay inside where it is safe." She nodded, her face pale but determined. "Be careful." The moment they stepped outside, the cold hit like a physical blow. The wind tore at their clothes and stung any exposed skin with needles of ice. Snow swirled so thickly that Zachary could not see Tom, even though the man was only 6 feet behind him on the rope. He bent his head against the wind and pushed forward, counting steps because he could see nothing else. 32 steps to the barn. He knew because he had walked it 1,000 times. His hands, even in heavy gloves, were already going numb. The world was white and howling, and if not for the rope anchoring him to the house, he knew he could wander in circles until the cold took him. His outstretched hand hit the barn wall, and he felt along it until he found the door. It took both his and Tom's strength to pull it open against the wind, and they tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them. The relief from the wind was immediate, though the barn was still bitterly cold. The horses and cattle had crowded together for warmth, their breath creating a fog in the dim interior. Zachary checked each animal, making sure none had been injured and that they had access to the water trough, which he had to break ice out of with a hammer. The animals had hay from the loft, and they seemed as content as could be expected given the circumstances. "They will be fine for another day or two," Tom said, his voice muffled by the scarf wrapped around his face. "But if this storm lasts longer, you will need to bring them more hay." "I know," Zachary said. The hayloft was well stocked, but cattle ate a prodigious amount and he had 30 head to feed. "Let's get back inside before we freeze." The return journey was just as treacherous, and by the time they tumbled back through the front door, both men were covered in snow and shaking with cold. Margaret had kept the fire roaring, and she hurried to help them out of their frozen outer layers. "You are both ice through and through," she said, worry evident in her voice. "Sit by the fire. I will make hot coffee." Zachary was grateful to let her take charge. His hands were so cold they felt like clubs at the ends of his arms, and painful tingling set in as feeling began to return. Tom was in a similar state, and they huddled near the fire like children, holding their hands as close to the flames as they dared. Margaret brought them coffee laced with sugar, and the hot, sweet liquid was like life itself flowing back into his body. He watched her move around the small house, tidying here, adjusting there, and he realized that she had a natural capability that spoke of years of managing a household. "You seem comfortable with domestic work," he observed. "I kept house for my father after my mother died," Margaret said. "I was 12 when she passed, and I learned quickly how to cook and clean and manage a home. After father died and I went to live with my aunt and uncle, I tried to earn my keep by taking on as much of the household burden as I could." 12 is young to lose your mother," Zachary said quietly. "Yes," Margaret agreed, "but it taught me to be strong, to be practical. When I saw the advertisement for a mail-order bride, I did not have romantic illusions about what I was getting into. I knew it would be hard work and a partnership built on mutual need rather than affection. But I thought it would be honest, and I thought it would be mine, a home and a life that belonged to me." There was such quiet dignity in the way she spoke that Zachary felt his respect for her grow. She had not come west chasing fairy tales. She had come looking for a chance to build something real, and that took courage. "You mentioned letters," he said. "Do you still have them?" Margaret nodded and retreated behind the curtain to her traveling bag. She returned with a bundle of papers tied with string. "There are 7 letters in total, spanning 3 months. They are signed with your name." Zachary untied the string and spread the letters on the table. The handwriting was neat and masculine, the words carefully chosen. He read through them one by one, his frown deepening with each page. The letters painted a picture of a lonely rancher seeking a true partner, someone to share his life and build a future with. They spoke of the beauty of Montana, the challenges and rewards of ranch life, and the kind of woman he hoped to find. She should be strong and capable, the letters said, willing to work hard but also someone who valued family and faith. The tone was respectful and warm, promising care and protection in exchange for companionship and partnership. "These are good letters," Zachary said slowly. "Whoever wrote them understands what a marriage should be. They speak of respect and equality, not just a business arrangement." "That is why I responded," Margaret said. "I have seen other mail-order bride advertisements that were crude or demanding. These felt different. They felt real." "But they are not from me," Zachary said, frustration creeping into his voice. "And look here at the return address. They say Zachary Raines, Raines Ranch, Bannack, Montana Territory. That much is true. But I never wrote them, never sent money for train fare, never asked for a bride." Tom had been reading over his shoulder. "The handwriting tells us something. This is an educated hand, someone with formal schooling. And look at the way certain letters are formed, particularly the capital R and the S. Those are distinctive." "You know handwriting?" Margaret asked. "Did some work as a legal clerk before I took to driving stages," Tom said. "You learn to recognize certain patterns. I would wager the person who wrote these is not native to Montana. Those letter formations are more Eastern in style, taught in the fancier schools back in the States." Zachary sat back, processing this information. Someone educated, possibly from the East, had deliberately impersonated him. But why? What could they possibly gain from bringing Margaret here under false pretenses? The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and Zachary realized that solving this mystery would have to wait. They were trapped by the storm, cut off from town and from any answers that might be found there. For now, they had to focus on survival and on navigating the awkward situation they found themselves in. The day passed slowly. They took turns reading from the few books Zachary owned, including a worn Bible, a collection of Shakespeare plays that had belonged to his mother, and a guide to cattle ranching that was more practical than entertaining. Margaret proved to be an excellent reader, her voice bringing life to the words, and Zachary found himself listening more to the sound of her voice than to the actual content. She insisted on preparing the midday meal, and though his supplies were basic, she managed to make something that tasted far better than anything he usually produced. She had a way of combining simple ingredients that elevated them, and both he and Tom praised her cooking. "You have a talent," Tom said, mopping up gravy with a piece of bread. "My late wife used to cook like this, making magic out of ordinary things." "Thank you," Margaret said, and Zachary noticed she seemed pleased by the compliment. "I enjoy cooking." There is something satisfying about taking raw ingredients and creating something nourishing and good. As evening approached, the reality of their situation became more pressing. Tom would sleep by the fire again, but the question of sleeping arrangements for Zachary and Margaret loomed large. Propriety demanded they maintain separate sleeping spaces, but the house was small and growing colder despite the fire. "I will sleep in the barn," Zachary offered. "The animals provide some warmth and I can wrap up well enough." "Absolutely not," Margaret said firmly. "You will freeze out there and we both know it. This is your home and I am the interloper. I should be the one making accommodations. No woman under my protection is sleeping in a barn in a blizzard," Zachary said, his tone brooking no argument. They stared at each other, both stubborn, until Tom cleared his throat. "Seems to me you are both being foolish. There is a perfectly good bed back there and you are both adults. String a blanket down the middle of it if you must. But neither of you should freeze for the sake of propriety that does not much matter when survival is at stake." Margaret's cheeks flamed red, and Zachary felt his own face heat. But Tom's words made sense, even if the suggestion was wildly improper. "I would not want to compromise your reputation," Zachary said carefully to Margaret. I think my reputation was compromised the moment I arrived at a bachelor's ranch claiming to be his mail-order bride, Margaret replied with a touch of dark humor. And Tom is right. We are fighting to survive, not attending a society ball. If we can both agree to behave as honorable people, then surely we can manage to share a sleeping space without impropriety. It was decided, though neither of them seemed entirely comfortable with the arrangement. When night fell and Tom had settled by the fire, Zachary and Margaret retreated behind the curtain. They had strung a blanket down the center of the bed, creating a physical barrier between the two sides. Zachary lay down fully clothed on his side, his back to the dividing blanket, and listened as Margaret settled on her side. The bed ropes creaked with her movements, and he was acutely aware of her presence just inches away. "Zachary," her voice was soft in the darkness. "Yes." "Thank you for being honorable, for treating me with respect even though none of this is what you wanted." "You deserve respect, Margaret. You did nothing wrong. You were brave enough to cross the country for a chance at a better life. That takes strength." There was a long pause, then her voice came again, even softer. "I was frightened when I realized you had not sent for me, terrified actually, but you have been kind, and that kindness means more than you know. Try to sleep," Zachary said gently. "Tomorrow the storm may break and we can start sorting out the details." But the storm did not break the next day or the day after that. The blizzard raged for 4 full days, trapping them in the small house with nothing but each other for company. In that time, something shifted between them. They fell into rhythms. Margaret cooked and kept the house tidy. Zachary maintained the fire and made the dangerous treks to the barn to care for the animals, though he never went alone and always with the rope line attached. Tom entertained them with stories from his years on the road, tales of interesting passengers and close calls that kept their minds off the howling wind outside. But it was in the quiet moments that Zachary began to truly see Margaret. She had a subtle sense of humor that caught him off guard, slipping out in dry observations that made him laugh. She was widely read and could discuss literature and history with an intelligence that impressed him. She was brave, never complaining about the cold or the cramped quarters or the uncertain future, and she was beautiful. That became harder to ignore as the days passed. The way firelight caught in her dark hair, the graceful movements of her hands as she worked, the soft sound of her humming while she cooked. He found himself watching her when he thought she was not looking, and more than once he caught her watching him too. On the 4th night, as they lay separated by the blanket between them, Margaret spoke into the darkness. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "Have you never wanted to marry, truly, because the letters spoke of loneliness, of wanting partnership?" "Even if you did not write them, perhaps they touched on something real." Zachary considered the question carefully. "I thought I would marry once. There was a girl in town when I was younger before I took over the ranch. Her name was Sarah, and we talked about a future together. But when my father died and left me this place, she made it clear that life as a rancher's wife was not what she wanted. She married a banker from Helena instead." "I am sorry," Margaret said. "Do not be. She was right to know what she wanted and to choose it. And I realized that I wanted someone who would want this life, who would see the value in it, not someone who would resent the work and the isolation." He paused. "What about you? Were you never courted back in Philadelphia?" "Once or twice, but nothing serious. After my father died, I had no dowry to speak of, and most men of my class were looking for advantageous matches. I was pretty enough but too poor to be worth pursuing." "Their loss," Zachary said before he could stop himself. He felt her shift on her side of the bed, and her voice held a smile when she spoke. "That is kind of you to say. It is not kindness. It is truth. You are intelligent and capable and brave, Any man would be lucky to have you as a partner." The silence that followed was charged with something neither of them seemed ready to name. Finally, Margaret whispered, "Good night, Zachary." "Good night, Margaret." On the fifth day, the wind finally died. The sky cleared to a brilliant blue, and the sun emerged, transforming the landscape into a wonderland of white that sparkled like diamonds. The temperature remained brutally cold, but the storm had passed. Tom announced his intention to attempt the journey back to town. "The stage line will be worried, and I need to report on the situation. Plus, you two need to figure out your circumstances, and that requires getting to town and asking some questions." Zachary could not argue with his logic. He helped Tom prepare for the journey, packing food and ensuring the old man was dressed as warmly as possible. The horses had survived the storm well, and Tom's two draft animals seemed eager to be moving again. "You take care of that lady," Tom said quietly as he prepared to leave. "She is something special, whether you sent for her or not." "I know," Zachary said, "and if I were you, I would be thanking whoever played Cupid rather than being angry about it. Sometimes Providence works in mysterious ways." With that, Tom climbed onto the driver's seat of the stage and set off, the coach runners cutting through snow that reached nearly to the horses' chests. Zachary watched until the stage disappeared down the road, then turned back to the house where Margaret waited. They were alone now, truly alone, and the awareness of it hung between them. Over the past days, they had grown comfortable with each other, but that comfort had included Tom as a buffer. Now it was just the two of them in the small house, and everything felt different. "I suppose we should discuss what comes next," Margaret said, standing by the window and watching the vast white landscape. "I cannot stay here indefinitely. It would not be proper, and I have already imposed on your hospitality far too long." "Where would you go?" Zachary asked. "You said yourself you have nowhere to return to in Philadelphia." "I could find work in town, perhaps. A hotel or restaurant might need help, or I could continue further west. I have heard there are opportunities in the larger cities like Denver or San Francisco." The thought of her leaving created an unexpected hollow feeling in his chest. "Is that what you want?" She turned to face him, and he saw uncertainty in her eyes. "I do not know what I want anymore. I came here thinking I knew exactly what my future would hold, and now everything is upside down. I feel unmoored, like a boat cut loose from its anchor." Zachary crossed the room to stand beside her at the window. "May I speak plainly, please? These past few days have been strange, but they have also been good. Having you here has made this house feel like a home instead of just a place I sleep between work. You are easy to be with, Margaret. You make me laugh. You challenge me to think about things differently. And I find myself hoping that you might choose to stay, not because of false letters or obligations, but because you want to." Margaret's breath caught. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am saying that whoever wrote those letters may have been deceiving us, but they were not wrong about what I need or what I have to offer. I have a good ranch, a home that could be made beautiful with the right person caring for it, and a life that I would be honored to share with someone strong enough to embrace it. If you are willing to consider it, I would like the chance to court you properly. No false pretenses, no obligations. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where it leads." Tears sparkled in Margaret's eyes. "You barely know me. I know enough. I know that you are brave and kind and smart. I know that you face difficulties with grace. I know that my house feels warmer with you in it, and not just because you are good at keeping the fire going." He managed a small smile. "The rest we can learn together if you are willing." "I am frightened," Margaret admitted. "Frightened of making another mistake, of trusting again and being hurt." I cannot promise you a perfect life, Zachary said honestly. Ranch life is hard and Montana winters are harsh. There will be struggles and setbacks. But I can promise you respect and partnership and my very best effort to make you happy. And maybe in time, love. Real love, not the practical arrangement you thought you were signing up for. Margaret reached out and took his hand, the first time they had touched with real intention. Her fingers were small and delicate in his work-roughened palm, but her grip was firm. I would like to try. Not marriage, not yet, but courtship, getting to know each other, as you said, seeing if this strange beginning might lead to something real. Relief flooded through him, along with a happiness he had not expected. Then you will stay. For now, yes, though we will need to find a way to make it proper. Perhaps there is a widow or older woman in town who could serve as a chaperone, Mrs. Peterson, Zachary said immediately. She is the widow of one of the other ranchers. Her children are grown and moved away, and I know she gets lonely in that big house by herself. I could ask if she would be willing to stay here as chaperone. I would pay her wages, of course. That might work, Margaret said. And it would give us both time to be certain of our feelings before making any permanent commitments. They stood together at the window, hands still joined, and looked out at the transformed landscape. The sun was beginning to set, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, and Zachary felt as though he was seeing the world with new eyes. We still need to find out who wrote those letters, he said. Do you have the envelopes? The postmarks might tell us something. Margaret retrieved them, and they examined each one carefully. All had been posted from Bannack, which meant someone local was behind the deception. The dates spanned from September through November of 1878, which was consistent with Margaret's story of 3 months of correspondence. We will need to ask around town, Zachary said. Someone must have seen these being posted, and someone paid for your train fare, which means money changed hands somewhere. There will be a trail. Does it truly matter? Margaret asked. We are here now, and we are making the best of it. Perhaps we should just let the mystery remain unsolved. It matters because I want to know if whoever did this meant kindness or mischief, Zachary said. And because if they did it to us, they might do it to someone else. Not everyone would be as fortunate as we are proving to be. The next day dawned clear and cold, and Zachary made preparations to ride into town. The 6-mile journey would be challenging with the deep snow, but his horse was strong, and the road was reasonably well marked. Margaret insisted on coming with him, arguing that she needed supplies and that sitting around the ranch waiting would drive her mad with boredom. He could not argue with her logic, so they bundled up in layers of clothing and set out on horseback. Zachary rode his gelding, a sturdy quarter horse named Duke, and Margaret rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. The closeness was both awkward and pleasant, and he found himself very aware of her presence pressed against his back. The ride took nearly 2 hours, with the horses struggling through drifts in some places and walking on windswept clear patches in others. When they finally crested the hill overlooking Bannack, Margaret gasped at the sight. The town sprawled along Grasshopper Creek, a collection of wooden buildings and false fronts that had seen better days. Once a booming gold mining town, Bannack had settled into a quieter existence as a ranching and supply center. The main street featured a general store, a bank, a saloon, a hotel, and various other businesses. Houses dotted the hillsides, and smoke rose from dozens of chimneys into the clear winter air. It is smaller than I expected, Margaret said. We are a territory, not a state, Zachary replied. And Bannack's glory days are behind it. But it is home, and the people are decent for the most part. They rode down the main street, and Zachary was aware of curious stares following them. News traveled fast in small towns, and he had no doubt that Tom had already spread the word about the mail-order bride who had arrived during the blizzard. By tomorrow, everyone in Bannack would know every detail, probably embellished beyond recognition. He stopped first at the general store, helping Margaret down from the horse and tying Duke to the hitching post. Inside, the store was warm and smelled of coffee and leather, and the various goods packed onto shelves that reached to the ceiling. Mr. Abernathy, the proprietor, looked up from behind the counter with obvious interest. "Zachary Raines, as I live and breathe," he said, his eyes sliding to Margaret with undisguised curiosity. "And you must be the young lady Tom was telling everyone about. Quite a storm to arrive in, miss." "Margaret Hayes," she said, offering her hand with admirable composure. "And yes, it was quite an arrival." "I need to speak with you privately, Abernathy," Zachary said, "about some letters." The store owner's eyebrows rose, but he nodded and called to his wife to mind the counter. He led them to a back room filled with additional stock and closed the door for privacy. "I am assuming this is about the mail-order bride situation," Abernathy said. "You know about that. Tom said there was some confusion about who sent the letters, said you claimed you never wrote them." Zachary pulled out the bundle of letters Margaret had saved. "Did you see anyone posting letters addressed to Miss Margaret Hayes in Philadelphia? These would have been sent over the course of several months." Abernathy took the letters and examined them carefully, his brow furrowing. "I do recognize these. I remember because the handwriting was so fine, and it is rare to see correspondence heading that far east from our little town. But I did not pay attention to who was mailing them. We get a lot of letters through here, Raines. I cannot remember every single one." "What about the money for train fare?" Margaret asked. "Surely that would have been memorable. It would have been a substantial amount." "Money orders to the east," Abernathy mused. "Let me check my records." He went to a desk in the corner and pulled out a ledger, flipping through pages. "Here. September 15th. A money order for $150 sent to Margaret Hayes in Philadelphia. And another on October 20th for $50. Both paid for in cash, so there is no name recorded beyond the recipient." "Did you see who purchased them?" Zachary pressed. "I truly do not remember," Abernathy said apologetically. "It was months ago, and like I said, we processed quite a few transactions. If it had been someone unusual or out of place, I might recall, but I assume it was someone local who came and went without incident." It was frustrating, but Zachary had not really expected it to be easy. "If you do remember anything, will you let me know, of course? And for what it is worth, Raines, the whole town is talking about this, and most folks think it is kind of romantic, like something out of a novel. A mysterious benefactor playing matchmaker, or a cruel prankster causing trouble," Zachary countered. "Well, either way, you have got yourself a fine-looking woman out of it," Abernathy said, earning a glare from Zachary. "Begging your pardon, Miss Hayes. No disrespect intended." "None taken," Margaret said graciously, though her cheeks had colored. They left the store with supplies and no more answers than they had arrived with. Zachary led Margaret to the hotel next, where he knew Mrs. Peterson often took lunch. They found her in the dining room, a handsome woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "Zachary Raines," she greeted him warmly. "I heard you had some excitement during the storm." "More than I bargained for," Zachary admitted. He introduced Margaret and explained the situation, including his request that Mrs. Peterson serve as chaperone at the ranch. She listened carefully, her eyes moving between them with assessment. "So you want me to live at your ranch to preserve this young lady's reputation while you court her?" "Yes, madam. I would pay you, of course, and provide room and board. I know it is an imposition." "It is nothing of the sort," Mrs. Peterson said briskly. "I have been rattling around my empty house feeling useless since Harold died. The idea of being needed again, of being part of something, appeals to me greatly. When would you want me to start?" "As soon as possible," Zachary said. "Perhaps tomorrow, if that is not too soon." "Tomorrow is perfect. I will pack my things this afternoon." She looked at Margaret with warmth. "And do not worry, dear. I may be old-fashioned about propriety, but I am not a dragon. I remember what it was like to be young and falling in love." "We are not," Margaret started, then stopped, flustered. "That is, we barely know each other." "Then you have something wonderful ahead of you, Mrs. Peterson said with a knowing smile. "Discovery. My Harold and I courted for a full year before we married, and those months of getting to know each other were some of the sweetest of my life." They made arrangements for Mrs. Peterson to arrive the following day, then continued their inquiries around town. At the bank, at the saloon, at the blacksmith shop, they asked about the letters and the money orders. No one remembered anything useful. Whoever had orchestrated this had been careful to remain anonymous. By late afternoon, they were cold and tired and no closer to answers. They stopped at the hotel restaurant for hot food before making the return journey to the ranch. Over beef stew and fresh bread, Margaret looked at Zachary with thoughtful eyes. "Perhaps we should consider that we may never know who did this," she said. "And perhaps that is all right. What matters is what we do with the situation we have been given." "You are probably right," Zachary admitted, "but it bothers me not knowing. I do not like mysteries, especially ones that directly affect my life." "I understand, but think about it this way. If we never discover who wrote those letters, then this becomes our story to write, not theirs. We decide where it goes from here." Her words struck something deep in him. She was right. They could spend all their energy chasing shadows, or they could focus on building something real between them. The choice seemed obvious when she put it that way. "You are wise, Margaret Hayes," he said softly. "I try to be practical," she corrected. "Wisdom may be overstating it." They rode back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Margaret had been quiet for much of the ride, but as they approached the house, she spoke. "I am glad I came here. Even though it was based on deception, even though everything went wrong, I am glad I am here now. With you." Zachary reined Duke to a stop and turned to look at her. In the fading light she was beautiful, her dark eyes reflecting the sunset, her cheeks pink from the cold. He reached back and took her hand. "I am glad too. More glad than I have the words to express." They stayed like that for a moment, hands clasped, looking at each other with something new and fragile growing between them. Then Zachary urged Duke forward again, and they completed the journey home. Mrs. Peterson arrived the next day as promised, her belongings packed in 2 large trunks that Zachary hauled into the house. She took immediate charge of the household, but in a way that felt helpful rather than intrusive. She claimed the small alcove near the kitchen as her sleeping area, insisting that Margaret should keep the proper bed. With a chaperone in residence, the atmosphere in the house shifted. There was less awkwardness, more structure to their days. Mrs. Peterson proved to be excellent company, full of stories about the early days of Bannack and the colorful characters who had passed through during the gold rush. She also proved to be a shrewd observer of human nature. One evening, about a week after her arrival, she found Zachary alone in the barn tending to Duke. "You are falling in love with her," she said without preamble. Zachary froze in the act of brushing the horse's flank. "I barely know her." "Time is not the only measure of connection, Mrs. Peterson said. "I have seen the way you look at her, the way she looks at you. There is something genuine there, something with the potential to grow into something lasting. What if it is too fast? What if we are caught up in the drama of the situation and mistake that for real feeling? That is always a risk in any courtship, Mrs. Peterson said. But I do not think that is what is happening here. You two are well matched. She is strong enough to handle the demands of ranch life, and you are thoughtful enough to appreciate her intelligence and spirit. The question is not whether you are falling in love. The question is what you will do about it. Court her properly, Zachary said. Give her time to be certain of her feelings, not rush her into anything. Good, Mrs. Peterson approved. But do not be so cautious that you let fear hold you back from happiness. Life is short, Zachary. When you find something good, you should hold on to it. Winter deepened, and the ranch settled into the rhythms of the season. The days were short and brutally cold, but inside the house there was warmth and growing affection. Zachary courted Margaret with old-fashioned deliberateness, finding small ways to show his regard. He brought her wildflowers he found preserved in ice along the creek. He spent his evenings teaching her to play chess with a set his father had carved. He listened when she read aloud from books, and he shared stories of his childhood and his dreams for the ranch. Margaret, in turn, revealed herself in layers. She was deeply loyal to those she cared about. She had a stubborn streak that could be exasperating, but that he found he admired. She was generous with her time and her skills, teaching Mrs. Peterson some of the recipes she had learned from her mother and helping Zachary with the ranch accounts when she discovered he was terrible at bookkeeping. They grew comfortable with each other, but never complacent. There was always an awareness between them, a spark that suggested the potential for something deeper. Their hands would brush while working side by side at the kitchen table. Their eyes would meet across the room and hold a moment longer than necessary. When they rode out together to check on the cattle, he would help her mount her horse, his hands at her waist, and both would feel the electricity of the contact. One evening in early February, a heavy snow falling outside, they sat together by the fire while Mrs. Peterson dozed in her chair nearby. Margaret had been reading aloud from Shakespeare's sonnets, and when she finished one particularly beautiful verse about enduring love, she closed the book and looked at Zachary. "You believe in that?" she asked. "Love that lasts beyond death, beyond time?" "I think I am beginning to," Zachary said. "My parents had that kind of love. When my father died, my mother followed him within 6 months. The doctor said it was her heart, but I always knew it was really her heartbreak. She could not bear to be in the world without him." "That is beautiful and sad at once," Margaret said softly. "Yes," Zachary agreed, "but I think I understand it now in a way I did not before. When you love someone truly, when they become so essential to your life that you cannot imagine breathing without them, their loss must feel like losing part of yourself." He reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "Margaret, these past months have shown me what my life could be, what it should be. You have brought light and laughter and warmth to this house, and you have shown me that the loneliness I thought was just part of ranch life was really just because I had not found the right person to share it with." Margaret's breath quickened. "Zachary, I am not asking anything of you yet," he said quickly. "I know we agreed to take our time to be certain, but I want you to know that my feelings are not in doubt. I love you, Margaret. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn insistence on doing things properly. I love the way you hum while you work and the way you challenge me to think differently about things. I love who I am when I am with you." Tears sparkled in Margaret's eyes, catching the firelight. "I love you too. I think I started falling in love with you that first night, when you could have been angry about the deception but instead chose kindness. When you carried me inside and made sure I was warm and safe. Every day since then, I have fallen a little more." Zachary cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks. Will you marry me? Not because letters told you to, not because circumstances forced you here, but because you want to, because you choose me as much as I choose you." "Yes," Margaret whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He kissed her then, a gentle press of lips that spoke of promise and new beginnings. It was their first kiss, and it felt like coming home. When they finally pulled apart, they found Mrs. Peterson watching them with a satisfied smile. "About time," she said. "I was beginning to wonder if you two would ever get on with it." They laughed, the sound joyous and free, and the house seemed to glow with happiness. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Bannack. Mrs. Peterson stood as witness, and several of the neighboring ranchers and their families attended. Margaret wore a dress of deep blue wool that Mrs. Peterson had helped her sew, and Zachary wore his best suit, the one he had bought for his brother's funeral but had never worn since. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together on faith and mutual respect. When Zachary slipped a simple gold band onto Margaret's finger, his hand trembled slightly, not from nerves but from the magnitude of the promise he was making. And when Margaret repeated her vows, her voice was clear and strong, leaving no doubt about her conviction. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music and dancing that lasted into the evening. The people of Bannack had embraced Margaret as one of their own, charmed by her grace and won over by the romantic story of how she had arrived during the blizzard. If anyone thought it scandalous that she had been living at Zachary's ranch, they kept it to themselves, especially with Mrs. Peterson's stern presence ensuring propriety. As the evening wore on, Zachary found himself standing at the edge of the room, watching Margaret laugh with some of the ranch wives. She looked radiant, her face alight with happiness, and he could hardly believe his good fortune. "You are a lucky man, Raines," a voice said beside him. He turned to find John Mercer, a fellow rancher whose spread bordered his own. "That wife of yours is something special." "I know," Zachary said. "Any idea who actually sent for her?" Mercer asked. "Seems like quite a mystery." "We have given up trying to figure it out," Zachary admitted. "Whoever did it gave us a great gift, whether they intended to or not." The mystery of the letters remained unsolved as winter gave way to spring. The snow melted, revealing the brown grass beneath, and then the grass greened up with the warming weather. Margaret proved to be every bit the partner Zachary had hoped for, throwing herself into ranch work with enthusiasm. She learned to ride well, to help with the cattle, and to manage the household with efficiency. But it was in the small moments that their love truly deepened. The way she would bring him coffee when he was working late on paperwork. The way he would rub her sore shoulders after a long day. The quiet conversations in the evening, sharing thoughts and dreams. The laughter that came more easily as they grew more comfortable with each other. Mrs. Peterson returned to her own home in May, satisfied that the marriage was solid and needed no further chaperoning. Before she left, she pulled Margaret aside. "You have made a beautiful life here," she said. "And you have made Zachary happier than I have ever seen him. Whatever brought you to Montana, whether it was fate or chance or human meddling, I am grateful for it." "So am I," Margaret said, embracing the older woman. "Thank you for everything you have done for us." Summer brought long days of hard work but also deep satisfaction. The ranch thrived under their joint efforts. Margaret's good management of the household finances allowed them to invest in improvements, including a new barn and additional cattle. Zachary found that having a true partner made every aspect of ranch life more manageable and more enjoyable. One evening in late June, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Margaret turned to Zachary with a secret smile. "I have news," she said. "Good news, I hope. Very good news. We are going to have a baby. I visited the doctor in town yesterday, and he confirmed it. The baby should arrive in January. Zachary felt his heart swell with joy so profound it was almost painful. A baby. A child who would grow up in this house on this land, surrounded by love. He pulled Margaret close and kissed her deeply. "You have made me happier than I ever thought possible," he said when they finally broke apart. "A wife I love and now a child. I have everything I ever wanted, even if I did not know I wanted it until you arrived." "We have everything we need," Margaret agreed. "A home, each other, and now a family. Whatever storms come, we will weather them together." The months that followed were filled with preparation. Zachary built a cradle from oak, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Margaret sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face soft with maternal anticipation. The ranch wives threw a party for her in December, showering her with gifts and advice about motherhood. True to the doctor's prediction, the baby arrived on a cold January night. The labor was long and difficult, with Mrs. Peterson and the midwife attending while Zachary paced the kitchen, praying and worrying in equal measure. But when he finally heard the strong cry of his newborn child, relief flooded through him. "You have a son, Mrs. Peterson announced, emerging from behind the bedroom curtain with a smile. "And Margaret did beautifully. She is tired but well. You can see them now." Zachary entered the bedroom on shaking legs to find Margaret propped up against pillows, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in the blue blanket she had made. Her hair was damp with sweat, and her face was pale with exhaustion, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. "Meet your son," she said, her voice hoarse but full of love. "I was thinking we might name him Thomas after your brother." Zachary felt tears prick his eyes. He sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. "Thomas Raines. It is a good, strong name." He reached out a finger and his son wrapped a tiny hand around it, the grip surprisingly firm. In that moment, Zachary felt the full weight and wonder of fatherhood settle onto his shoulders. "Thank you," he whispered to Margaret. "For him, for us, for everything." "We made him together," Margaret said. "And we will raise him together. He will grow up knowing love and security and the value of hard work. He will have everything we can give him." Thomas proved to be a healthy, happy baby who grew steadily through the winter. As spring returned to Montana, and the ranch came back to life, Zachary and Margaret settled into the rhythms of parenthood. The sleepless nights, the endless laundry, the constant feedings were all worth it for the smiles and coos and small milestones. One day in April, a letter arrived addressed to Zachary. He opened it curiously, as he received little personal correspondence. Inside was a single sheet of paper, and as he read it, his eyebrows rose. "What is it?" Margaret asked, seeing his expression. "It is from Sarah," he said slowly. "The woman I mentioned, the one I thought I would marry years ago. She says she has something important to tell me and asks if she can visit." "Of course she can visit," Margaret said without hesitation. "I am curious to meet her, actually." Sarah arrived the following week, arriving in a hired carriage. She was still pretty, Zachary noted, but there was a hardness around her eyes that had not been there in their youth. She looked around the ranch with an expression that might have been regret. They invited her in for coffee, and after the initial pleasantries, Sarah got to the point of her visit. "I owe you an explanation and an apology," she said. "I am the one who sent the letters." Zachary and Margaret stared at her in shock. "You," Zachary finally managed. "But why?" Sarah looked down at her hands. "Because I made a terrible mistake when I married Raymond. He is not a bad man, but he is not you. And I have spent the past several years regretting my choice, wondering if you had married someone else." One day I was in Bannack visiting relatives, and I overheard some men talking about your ranch and how you were still unmarried. And I thought, what if I could bring you someone worthy of you? What if I could give you the happiness I had denied you? So you impersonated him and sent for a mail-order bride? Margaret asked, her voice carefully neutral. It sounds insane when you say it like that, Sarah admitted. But at the time, it seemed like the right thing to do. I had read about mail-order brides, and I thought if I could find the right woman, someone strong and capable, she might be exactly what Zachary needed. So I placed advertisements in newspapers back east, and I read the responses. Yours stood out, Margaret. You wrote about wanting a true partnership, about being willing to work hard and build something meaningful. You sounded perfect. You had no right, Zachary said, anger coloring his voice. You manipulated both of us. I know, Sarah said quietly, and I am sorry, I truly am. But I also see that it worked out. You are happy, are you not? You have a beautiful wife and a child, and from what I hear in town, your ranch is prospering. That does not excuse what you did, Margaret said firmly. You lied to both of us. You used Zachary's name without permission. You brought me across the country under false pretenses. We could have both been hurt badly by your scheming. But you were not, Sarah argued. You fell in love and married and built a life together. I gave you that. No, Zachary said, standing up and moving to stand beside Margaret's chair, his hand on her shoulder. You did not give us anything. We built this ourselves. Yes, your lies brought Margaret here, but what happened after that was our choice, our work, our love. You do not get to take credit for that. Sarah's face crumpled. I just wanted to do something good. I wanted to fix the mistake I made in letting you go. You cannot fix your mistakes by manipulating other people's lives, Margaret said, though her voice had softened slightly. But I will say this. While I do not approve of what you did, I am grateful for where I ended up. Zachary is the best man I have ever known, and our life together is more than I ever dreamed possible. So in that sense, your scheme worked, even if the method was deeply flawed. I am leaving Montana, Sarah said after a long pause. Raymond has taken a position in Chicago and we are moving next month. I wanted to tell you the truth before I left to clear my conscience. I hope someday you might forgive me. I forgive you, Zachary said, surprising himself. Not because what you did was right, but because holding on to anger serves no purpose. You thought you were helping, even if you went about it all wrong. And the result, as flawed as the process was, gave me the greatest happiness I have ever known. Sarah left shortly after, and Zachary and Margaret stood together on the porch, watching the carriage disappear down the road. Well, Margaret said, that was not what I expected. No, Zachary agreed, but at least we know now, at least the mystery is solved. Does it change anything? Margaret asked, looking up at him. He thought about it, then shook his head. No, it changes nothing that matters. We are still us. Our love is still real. Our life is still ours. Good, Margaret said, leaning into him. Because I would not change a single thing about how we ended up together, even the deception and the blizzard and the confusion. It is our story, and I love it. They stood there together as the sun began to set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant colors. From inside the house, they could hear Thomas starting to fuss, and Margaret turned to go to him. Zachary caught her hand and pulled her back for a kiss. I love you, he said simply. I love you too, Margaret replied. Always. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management. Thomas grew into a strong, curious boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. When he was 3, his sister Emma arrived, and 2 years after that, another son they named William. The house that had once seemed large and empty to Zachary now rang with the sounds of children's laughter and busy family life. Margaret transformed it from a bachelor's simple dwelling into a true home, with curtains at the windows and pictures on the walls and a sense of warmth that went beyond the physical. They faced challenges, as all couples do. There were years when the cattle prices were low and money was tight. There were harsh winters and dry summers. There were illnesses and injuries and all the normal struggles of life on the frontier. But they faced everything together, their love deepening with each trial overcome. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary gave Margaret a gift he had been working on for months. It was a leather-bound book, and on the first page he had written, "The story of us." "I wrote down everything," he said as she opened it with wondering eyes. "From the moment you arrived in that blizzard to today. Our whole story, so that someday our children and grandchildren will know how we came to be together." Margaret read through the pages, tears streaming down her face. "It is beautiful," she whispered, "and so are you for making this." "Our story deserves to be remembered," Zachary said. "Not just the happy parts, but all of it. The confusion and the fear and the challenges, because they are what made us who we are." That night, after the children were asleep, they sat together on their porch as they had so many times before, watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky. Margaret rested her head on Zachary's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if I had never come?" Margaret asked. "Sometimes," Zachary admitted, "but not with any real regret. Before you, I had a life, but it was not really living. I was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose beyond just working the land. You gave me love and partnership and a family. You gave me everything that matters." "You gave me those things too," Margaret said. "When I stepped off that stagecoach into the blizzard, I was so frightened. I had no idea what I was walking into, or if I had made a terrible mistake. But then there you were, carrying me inside, making sure I was safe, treating me with kindness even though I was a stranger who had disrupted your life. You showed me what a good man looks like, and I have been grateful every day since." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. An owl hooted in the distance. The cattle lowed softly from their pasture. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of prairie flowers and earth. "I have been thinking," Zachary said after a while. "Thomas is getting old enough to start really learning the ranch work. I want to teach him everything my father taught me, so that someday this place will be his if he wants it." "He adores you," Margaret said. "He follows you everywhere, watching everything you do. I have no doubt he will want to follow in your footsteps." "And if he does not, that will be fine too," Zachary said. "I want our children to have choices, to know they can make their own paths, whatever those might be." "Spoken like a true father," Margaret said with a smile, "but I think you will find that Thomas loves this land as much as you do. It is in his blood." As if to prove her point, the sound of small feet padding across the floor reached them from inside. A moment later, Thomas appeared in the doorway, clutching the stuffed horse Margaret had made him. "I had a bad dream," he said, his voice small and uncertain. Zachary held out his arms, and his son climbed into his lap, snuggling against his chest. Margaret adjusted her position so she could stroke Thomas's hair, and they sat like that, a family unit, until the boy's breathing evened out in sleep. "We should put him back to bed," Margaret whispered. "In a minute," Zachary said. "I just want to hold him a little longer." These were the moments he treasured most, not the big milestones or celebrations, but these quiet instances of simple family togetherness. The weight of his son in his arms, the warmth of his wife beside him, the peaceful night surrounding them. This was what happiness looked like, he thought. This was what made all the hard work and sacrifice worthwhile. Eventually, they carried Thomas back to his bed, tucking him in carefully so as not to wake him. They checked on Emma and William, both sleeping soundly, then made their way to their own bed. As they lay together in the darkness, Margaret's hand found Zachary's. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" "For being you, for loving me, for giving me this life. I could not have imagined anything better than what we have built together." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Zachary said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "You are my greatest blessing, Margaret. You and the children. Everything good in my life flows from you." They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, hearts entwined, secure in the knowledge that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The ranch continued to grow and prosper over the following years. Thomas did indeed take to ranching with enthusiasm, becoming his father's right hand as soon as he was old enough. Emma proved to have a head for numbers and took over managing the ranch accounts when she was just 15. William, the youngest, had a gift with horses that surprised everyone, able to gentle even the most skittish animal with patience and kindness. Zachary and Margaret watched their children grow with pride and wonder. The house that had once held just one lonely man now overflowed with life and love. There were Sunday dinners with all the family gathered around the table. There were holidays celebrated with tradition and joy. There were arguments and reconciliations, tears and laughter, all the complex tapestry of family life. When Thomas turned 20, he married a girl from town named Caroline, and they built a house on the northern edge of the ranch property. Emma fell in love with the new schoolteacher, a serious young man named David who appreciated her intelligence and spirit. William took his time, but eventually he found his match in a rancher's daughter from across the valley, a woman as horse-crazy as he was. Zachary and Margaret became grandparents, and then great-grandparents. The ranch passed into Thomas's capable hands, and Zachary found himself with time to simply enjoy life. He and Margaret would take long rides across the land they had built together, remembering the early days and marveling at how much had changed. "You remember that first night?" Margaret asked him once as they sat on the same porch where they had shared so many conversations over the years. They were both in their 60s now, their hair silver, their faces lined with the years, but their love had only grown stronger. "Of course I remember," Zachary said. "You were half frozen and completely confused, and I was trying to figure out what in the world was going on." "I thought my life was over," Margaret admitted. "When you said you had not sent for me, I thought I had made the worst mistake possible. I had nowhere to go, no way to support myself, and I was trapped in a stranger's house in the middle of a blizzard." "And instead you found a home," Zachary said. "I found love," Margaret corrected. "The home came second. You came first always." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the mountains they had watched for so many years. The same mountains, the same sky, but everything else had changed. Where once there had been just Zachary's small house, there was now a thriving ranch with multiple buildings and several families working the land. Where once there had been loneliness, there was now abundance. "I have been thinking about Sarah," Margaret said unexpectedly. "About how she manipulated us and lied to us, and how angry we were when we found out." "And," Zachary prompted, "and I think I finally understand why she did it. Not that it makes it right, but I understand. She saw an opportunity to create something good, to bring together two people who might never have found each other otherwise. Her methods were terrible, but her intentions were not entirely selfish." "You are more forgiving than I am," Zachary said, "but I suppose in the end, it does not matter. We made our own choice to be together. Her scheming may have brought you here, but it was our love that kept you here." "Exactly," Margaret agreed. "And that is what I want our children and grandchildren to understand, That love is not about the circumstances that bring people together. It is about what they choose to build after those circumstances are revealed. It is about commitment and partnership and choosing each other every single day. You have been my choice every day for more than 40 years, Zachary said, taking her hand as he had so many times before. And you will continue to be my choice for whatever time we have left. And you are mine, Margaret said, always and forever. They were given another decade together, 10 more years of watching their family grow and the ranch prosper. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with a party that brought together 3 generations, and Zachary gave a toast that left few dry eyes. 50 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, a woman arrived at my ranch in the middle of a blizzard. She was not supposed to be there. I had not sent for her. But she came anyway, and in coming, she gave me everything that has made my life worth living. She gave me love and partnership and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be grateful every single day. Margaret, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, and marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. Margaret, tears streaming down her face, stood to embrace him. And you are mine, she said simply. My love, my partner, my home. In the end, they went together as Zachary's parents had. He passed first, quietly in his sleep one autumn night, and Margaret followed 3 days later. The doctor said her heart simply stopped, but everyone who knew them understood that she had died of heartbreak, unable to bear being in the world without her other half. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree that had been a sapling when Margaret first arrived. Their headstone reads simply, Zachary and Margaret Raines. They chose love. Their story became legend in Bannack and the surrounding area. The mail-order bride who had arrived in a blizzard, the cowboy who had warmed her by his fire and with his love. Parents told it to their children as an example of how love could bloom in the most unexpected circumstances. Young couples invoked it as inspiration, proof that true partnership was possible even when beginnings were unconventional. Thomas kept his father's leather-bound book, the story of his parents' life together, and he added to it over the years, documenting how their love had created a legacy that extended far beyond just the two of them. The ranch they had built together continued to thrive, passing through generations, and each generation knew the story of how it all began, with one woman arriving in a storm, one man offering shelter, and both of them choosing to build something beautiful from uncertain beginnings. It was a story of second chances and unexpected blessings, of love that grew stronger through trials, of a partnership that became the foundation for everything that followed. And though Zachary and Margaret were gone, their love remained, woven into the fabric of the land they had worked, the children they had raised, and the legacy they had created. They had found each other against all odds, built a life together through hard work and devotion, and left behind proof that love, when nurtured and cherished, could indeed last beyond death, beyond time, just as Shakespeare had promised in those sonnets Margaret had read so long ago by the fire. Their story was complete, with no loose ends, no unanswered questions. Just 2 lives fully lived, fully loved, and fully intertwined, exactly as they both had hoped for on that long-ago night when a blizzard brought them together and changed everything forever.